Well, welcome everyone to another Come Let Us Reason podcast. This is Lenny Esposito. I'm president of Come Reason Ministries, and this week we're going to explore a lot of what's happening in the news. You've seen, of course, the increase in the number of mass shootings. They've been taking up a lot of the headlines, but what's causing this? Is it that there's simply too many guns in America? Is it that guns are a problem, but they're being combined with other issues? Or are there points in this issue that we're missing completely? Maybe it's not simply mass shootings. Maybe that's just the most obvious problem of a much larger malady that's actually corroding our civilization. And I'm going to be talking about that with my guest, Raymond Gregory, on this Come Let Us Reason Together podcast. Well, good morning, everyone. As I said, I'm excited to bring you this podcast. And one way I get to have a great time is to invite some of my friends over. Now, you all remember Raymond Gregory. He's been on the podcast before. He's joining us today. And we're going to be talking about not merely the rise in crime and gun deaths that we're seeing in the United States, but we're looking at these and starting to see some issues in our culture that's probably a little bit more important and a little bit more serious than people may even believe. So, Raymond, welcome. Glad to have you on again. Excited to talk to you about these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's always enlightening to talk to Lenny Esposito.
Well, I guess excited may not be the best adverb to use. I mean, I wish that we didn't have to deal with such issues, sure. But of course it's all over the news, and it makes sense that we're dealing with these kinds of things. You know, anytime you see such incredible death and destruction, really, that we're seeing as we see the rise in homicides. I mean, the shooting at the mall in Dallas, Texas was just the most recent of these kinds of tragedies that we're seeing. But we can now recall just this year at least 3 or 4 others, and those are not even all of the ones that are classified as mass shootings. So what are you seeing? What goes through your mind when you see a headline like the one that talks about the mass shooting at the Dallas Mall? What do you think you're taking away from that?
There's a lot that goes through your head. The sad thing is, I don't want to say familiarity breeds contempt, or even complacency.
Yeah,
but the news cycle is such that we're hearing about everything everywhere. Isn't that a TV show or a movie? Everything everywhere all at once, right?
It's about right.
It's as if we're living multiple lives in multiple communities and multiple points of your day. And so when you start to hear these things, the first thing is always heartbreak, especially when children die. There's something about a child dying still that I think we all agree is the highest form of tragic death. But the sad thing is it becomes too familiar. And when things become too familiar, they become easier to brush aside as a normality, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
And it's not a normality. I think because we're hearing about it more frequently, that we're starting to create patterns where maybe there aren't patterns, and ignoring patterns where there actually are patterns.
So that's a great point. So I've had this conversation before with my wife, for example. We live in a society that's laced with safetyism. So it used to be, I mean, when I was a kid, even as young as second grade, I would walk home from school mile and a half. And this was in an industrial area. This wasn't, just a tree-lined neighborhood. And nobody worried about guy in a shady white van coming up and snatching you off the street. I mean, did that happen? Well, sure, it's always happened. And, you know, but nobody said, I can't let my kids walk home alone. My granddaughter was walking home from the store. Actually, we were walking with her, and she got up and she started going. She wanted to run home by herself. So she was ahead of us, you know. And a lady in a car pulled up and asked her if she was okay because she saw a 10-year-old girl walking on the street alone, and she thought that that was something akin to child abuse. When you look at the statistics of kids getting, you know, kidnapped, first of all, they're down overall from prior years, and still over 95% of the child abduction cases that you read are usually a result of custody disputes. They're the non-custodial parent taking them. But because they are ubiquitous online, because they're posted, and you know, you have the Amber Alerts now, and you have they're top of mind, top of presence, people start to think, oh, this happens all the time, and we're living in a much more dangerous situation. So on one hand, you're right. The fact that we hear of every tragedy everywhere makes it feel like we're seeing something, our society becoming so violent that we hadn't ever seen before. That's not necessarily true. On the other hand, it is true that homicide rates are rising in the United States. They aren't as bad as they were in the 70s or 80s. Okay, that's clear. They're at about 50 to about 60% of the average that we saw in the 70s, 80s, up to 1990. So they're not as bad, but they are going up from what they were. They've been trending upwards in this from 2010 on forward. There was a little bit of dip in 17 and 18, but we saw a 28% increase in 2020 in homicide rates from 2019. We saw a 2% increase 2019 to 2018. So you get the idea that, I mean, the trends are going up. It's not nothing. And that's why I start thinking about these things. One of the things that I had said when we start looking at mass shooters is, why are people reacting with a gun so quickly? Why is that a thing? Because not all mass shootings are the same. Now, let's define our terms, I guess, before we go too far. What does a mass shooting, what does that qualify as? And the folks who do the statistics on this, the Gun Violence Archive, defines a mass shooting as 4 or more people who have been murdered through guns at a single event. That's how they classify mass shootings. And we've seen it. We've seen, of course, the one in Dallas. One person in Atlanta and 4 were dead in a mass shooting at a medical center on May 3rd, which didn't get a lot of press coverage. 5 people in Cleveland, Texas, and 28 were injured when a mass shooting broke out. And an execution style this was a man who was firing his gun in the front yard, and the neighbors told him to be quiet. They were all Honduran immigrants, and he came over and basically shot them all. Dadeville, Alabama, 4 people were killed and 28 others injured when a mass shooting broke out at a Sweet 16 birthday party. That's one that didn't get a lot of coverage. 4 people were dead, and they some of them were under 18. Louisville, Kentucky, of course, 4 people dead, 8 others, following a mass shooting at a bank with a bank employee. I don't know if you remember that one. And then the famous one in Nashville at Covenant School, a Christian school, where the transgender individual opened fire, killing 6. Michigan State University, Oakland, California, Monterey Park, 11 people were killed, 10 others injured when the 72-year-old man came in and started massacring. And on it goes. Yeah, we're seeing more of that. But what would it be? Is that just one aspect of maybe a larger issue? Because not only are we seeing more mass shootings, we're seeing other forms of violence. Like I said, homicide in general is up. And let's take people who are using their vehicles as lethal weapons, people who are driving, and you know, this was something you never ever heard about. But May 7th, 8 people were killed as a driver plowed a car into a group of migrants in Texas. That one made the news. November 12th, 6 people were hospitalized after a driver rammed his car through a carnival barricade in South LA. A year before, the driver plowed into that Waukesha Christmas parade, if you remember that one, leaving 5 dead and 40 injured. And just May 9th, just recently, just 2 days ago, the Stanislaus police captain saved a festival crowd from being hit by a speeding driver by ramming the driver head on with his car. So you're seeing a lot more aggression with cars. You're seeing some stabbings. You're seeing basically people are getting more aggressive. Could it be that the primary problem isn't the method of attack? While guns are definitely the most lethal weapon that one can choose, there seems to be a general aggression and disregard for human life. Now,
that's it right there. That's 100% what it is. I think there's 2 things that are happening. 2 things that are coming to a head. Actually, I think it's 3 things that are coming to a head all at once that are causing such an influx and such type of things. Number 1 is this idea of inflation of rights. I don't know if you're familiar. Everyone's familiar with inflation. The more money you print and flood the economy with, the less your money is worth. Right. I think the same is true for basic human rights. When we start flooding the market with additional human rights, for instance, you hear a lot of people saying it's a basic human right to have a home. It's a basic human right to go to college. I've heard that, It's a basic human right. Probably the more egregious one, and it has more effect, is the right to abortion, or the so-called right to abortion. If all lives mean something and are equal and are equally valuable, then great. But once you give a right to one subset of humanity to take the life of another subset of humanity, you are now inflating that right, and the right to human life becomes less and less valuable. If you give the right to a woman to murder their unborn child at 12 weeks and it stops there, now the worth of a 12-week-old human life is less than it was before. If you do like you did in Colorado and make it an elective and legal at all points of birth,
right,
now a 9-month-old baby's life is worth a 30-year-old woman's life, because that's the inflation of rights. So the more rights that you allow, the more you erode basic human rights. So that's happening. So now there is entered the public sphere of, well, maybe some life is worth less than other lives. The second thing that is coming to a head is this idea of social justice, which has been around for a long, long, long time, which is morphed. People call it wokeism now, whatever you want to call it now. But the idea is the basic tenets of social justice is identifying groups with disparate outcomes, assigning blame for those disparate outcomes to another group, to a less disadvantaged group, and then redistributing resources from that group to the other group. Well, when you do that, you are inflating the rights of one group at the expense of another group. So now you have some lives are worth less than other lives. We've established that. Now we have a mechanism for identifying which lives are more valuable than. We saw this play out in 2020, certainly. And then the third thing is polarization. So inflation of human rights, social justice, in order to find out who is more valuable than the others. And then number three, whoever is the majority on the polarizing side wins, basically. And so whoever gets the most approval from the masses wins the argument. Wins the their side becomes intrinsically more valuable than the other side because they're employing these ideas. And the other problem is when one side is not willing to play that game and one side is only willing to play that game. And so I think you look at something like the Covington shooting, and the reaction to that was very telling of those three things coming to a head and which side is winning. You had I was 6 people that died, right? Is that correct? 3 of them kids.
3 kids, 3
staff
adults.
members.
Yeah.
3 children died. I think Elon Musk talks about the weighing out of human tragedy. Instead of one life to one life, he says we should be counting years lost. And the more years lost, the more tragic that death is. And he was talking more so about COVID. He said, well, if you look at, most of the people who are dying of COVID are in their 80s, 70s and 80s. But if most of them who are dying were children, we would say, wow, this is far more tragic because it's 75 years lost. And so through that lens, you have 3 children, highest level of tragedy, many years lost, parents losing children. It's not in the natural order. Children who will never live their lives, who could have been something to society, gone. But the person in the media and in the public's discourse who was deemed a victim in a lot of spheres, who was deemed the one with disparate outcomes, is the shooter, just by virtue of the group that she that wanted to be a man. I can't keep up with this stuff. Just by the virtue of what group she identified with.
Right.
Because she identified with a group that has been deemed in the war of polarization to be more oppressed, she is now more of a victim than the people she victimized.
It seems to be,
Once we go down that road, what's to stop anyone from an oppressed class, or who they perceive to be an oppressed class, from doing whatever they want when we don't hold them to the same accountability? It's the inflation of rights.
Yeah. Some
lives are worth more than others.
Well, so I want to kind of tease this out a little bit. When you talk about the inflation of rights, one of the things that you are pivoting on, and what a lot of people don't talk about specifically, is, well, what is a right? How do you understand rights, and what grounds rights? Rights are specific things that we recognize that are those things that make humanity human, those things that make us civil. Rights can be abridged, but they can never be truly removed. In other words, you can violate rights. You can't ever actually take them away. So the first thing we have to understand is rights can't be grounded in government. This was an argument that our founding fathers pulled from people like John Locke and other philosophers of that era, that there are certain aspects of things that nature and nature's God show are equal to all individuals. First of all, is the right to life. Everyone who is born, everyone who lives has the right to continue to live. It is, you can kill someone, but that is an abridgment of that right. They don't have the wherewithal to say, you don't have the right to live. Now, they can lose that right and through penalty in terms of, possibly capital punishment. but there is a natural right to live for all people. Sometimes the good of the society may deem that that's a just punishment for them. I'll put a capital punishment aside for right now, but those rights are established by God. In other words, we anchor those in the idea that we are created beings and we're created for a purpose, and therefore the way God creates us gives us certain rights, gives us certain aspects to our existence. And that's why the natural order says that you can't take those things away. No government can say, this class of people doesn't have the right to life. This class of people doesn't have the right to exercise their beliefs as they understand them. Things like that. When you start getting into things like everybody has the right to own a home, well, maybe that's where you're starting to get, or everybody has the right to college, or things like that. Well, no, that's not how society has always understood rights, nor is it how society has always lived, matter of fact. So a right is something that has to be grounded in God and in the created order, in how we are made and how we reflect God and his image. And this is where I'm thinking the bigger problem lies, because nobody's talking about the fact that maybe the rise in all of these points of tragedy is the fact that we have, as a culture, decided to unhook ourselves from God and his moral standards. So once John Adams famously said when we were creating this republic that this kind of government is only good for a moral people. It cannot withstand any other type. Mm-hmm. And so take something like the Second Amendment, where everyone has a right to bear arms. There's a reason why the Second Amendment says you have a right to bear arms, because if you have a right to liberty, if you have a right to express your own viewpoints, you have a right to seek your own method of happiness, as opposed to being coerced, in the ultimate form of non-libertarian coercion is slavery, right? So liberty sits in contradistinction to slavery. They're opposites. If you have the right to liberty, then you should also have the right to defend yourself so that you can keep that liberty. That's the goal of the Second Amendment. So that, because the colonists were not allowed to have firearms at one point, and they didn't want to be oppressed by those that did. It has nothing to do with muskets. Well, the oppressing class, if you want to use the social justice term, right? The English army had muskets, so the colonists had muskets. So when they talk about, those were written about muskets, not AR-15s. Well, the occupying government power, when they come in, what are they going to be holding in their hands? You got to be able to offset that.
It's escalation.
Right.
Everything escalates. It's equal grounds. Whenever it's like when everyone's super.
Right.
It's like nobody's super.
Exactly.
Incredibles.
Exactly. But if we unhook that now from God, and I said this when we were talking about these kinds of things in 2016, I said, you're going to see more of these. You're going to see more mass shootings. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse, just because I understand human nature. And if we start with a relativistic understanding of rights and a relativistic understanding of human worth, if human worth isn't grounded in God's image, if we aren't all equal because we're all equally flawed, because we're all created by God and we all have aspects of our being that not only reflect the grandeur of God, but reflect the depravity of our sin, and we don't understand that, then we're going to have a bigger problem, and it's just going to go up. And that's really what we're seeing. There's no good answer, I think, for this kind of thing, because what our society has done is slowly, while we're borrowing the cachet of Christianity and talking about, needing the marginalized to be unoppressed, that Those are all Christian ideas. They never existed in other societies. The Romans would have laughed at you if you would have said that kind of stuff. But
yeah, I just did a video responding to a Bill Maher comment about Bill Maher and Elon Musk saying, "Yeah, the Bible loves slavery, never condemns it, and all this kind of stuff." And so I'm like, this is ignorant. And so I did about 3 or 4 videos explaining why that's wrong, obviously, and the biggest, probably the biggest point to it is that this book, especially in the Old Testament, was written 3,500 years ago, right? 3,500 years ago. You cannot superimpose modern culture on a book written 3,500 years ago. You can mine truths that are true for all times, but you can't superimpose your culture on that language and then assume that you would have done any differently had you lived in that time. And you mentioned oppressors and oppressed. You want to talk about that? That was the only 2 options in the ancient world, was oppressors and oppressed. And we have this idea, we could even fast forward to like Nazi Germany. Like, I would have been the ones who stood up against.
Yeah, the famous picture of all the people who are giving the Hitler salute except the one guy, and everybody believes that they're one guy. You know what I usually respond on that?
He was killed for that, by the way.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it, and that's how you answer. You go, oh yeah, well, if you think you'll be that one guy, try this test. This is usually what I tell people who push back on this. Try this test. Go up to your friends and say, maybe there may be some good arguments for why abortion shouldn't be legal. Can we explore those? Now, you're not even saying you agree with it. You're just saying, can we explore those arguments? Let's see how brave you are to do that. Because what if in 100 years, people look at abortion the way we look at slavery today, which is very possible. But that's the test usually that I gave them. If you really think that you'd be the one guy to cross your arms when all that peer pressure is around you, let's see you do it today. And I've never had anyone take me up on it.
Yeah. And spoiler alert, the Bible does not condone slavery.
No, it doesn't. And matter of fact, look, first of all, in the ancient world, everybody was enslaved at some point. That doesn't necessarily make things right, but it was a fact of life. It was part of the economy. 70 to 90% of Rome was enslaved. You can't just say all the oxen free. Nobody would know where to go. But beyond that,
and there was no free market.
There was no free market. You had to you had
just
a ruling
go start
class.
A business. Like, you're free now. Go start a Starbucks. No, here's a franchise. You can
Yeah,
you're free. You die.
Well, and that's why women, that's what we read in the book of Ruth. That's what the problem with Ruth was. That's why she followed Naomi, because once your husband's gone, you have no choices. But let's go back to ancient Israel and this project. Okay, so you're going in and you're going to conquer an invading army or another people. Okay, you've done that. Now what? What are your choices? Seems to me you only have 3 options available to you. One is you can just wipe them all out. Just kill them all, and there's no more threat, right? The second is you could just let them all go, and what'll happen is they'll reform an army and come back at you, or their kids will come back and reform an army, and we've seen that. That actually is reflected in Scripture and in ancient history as well. The third option is that you take them prisoner. You take them all prisoner of war, which is what enslavement was. They were prisoners. Now, you had to treat them fairly. You couldn't, chattel slavery wasn't the same idea in the ancient world as it was in, say, the antebellum South. The chattel slavery in the antebellum South was specifically cruel. It was actually pretty ugly. In Rome, you could be a slave and you could own land. You could buy a house. You could choose who you marry, if you were a Roman slave. And so that kind of stuff doesn't exist.
And that chattel slavery, the way we understand it, was explicitly condemned, not by name because they didn't have a word for it, explicitly condemned in Exodus 21:16. Anyone who kidnaps a man or is found in possession of a kidnapped man is put to death.
Yeah.
So that doesn't play out in 1807, there was a Bible they called the Slave Bible, which took out all references found in Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and then parts of Genesis that talked of treating slaves well.
Yeah.
Why
would you do that?
If this book loved it so much, if this book loved slavery so much, why would people have to take out portions of it in order to not cause a slave rebellion in 1800? Well, the answer is obvious. Anyway, but yeah, the Bible explicitly condemns the style of chattel slavery that we see
it's
in
why
antebellum South.
It's why you see that they have the option of becoming a bond slave, a doulos, right? I mean,
yes.
If it's so awful, why would people bond themselves to that family, to that household for the rest of their lives?
Yeah. Anyway,
but
that's the public discourse about the Bible, and so that's what's happening is we are able to now take universally agreed upon evils and accuse the Bible of those evils, and therefore making the Bible evil, which is why the transgender movement is dangerous for the church, more so the LGBTQ plus A, B, C, D, F, G. That movement is dangerous because now the Bible is homophobic, right? Now, and the feminist movement is a reframing of the way culture and truth works, because now the Bible is misogynistic. So now you can sit there and say, how could you follow a book so evil that it condones slavery, is homophobic, misogynistic, written by patriarchal men?
So, and that
plays really well. Right?
Yeah, there's so much wrong with that. Of course, first of all, written by patriarchal men, that's the genetic fallacy. Immediately you're saying just because it comes from this source, therefore it's negated, which, that's like saying, well, my second grade teacher taught me 2 + 2 is 4, and it turns out my second grade teacher was convicted of perjury, so therefore I shouldn't believe 2 + 2 is 4. Right. That's ridiculous. But more than that, it's easy to try and dismiss these kinds of things. It reminds me of a guy who once told me, the Bible gets all its facts wrong. It calls the bat a bird, and the bat's not a bird. And I'm going like, you're using a taxonomy that was created in the 17th century to talk about a text that was created in the second millennium BC. Yes. Maybe the Hebrews classified all of their animals by the type of transport that they use, the type of locomotion, and bats fly and birds fly, and so that's what they can classify it as. So it is silly and anachronistic to try and pour stuff, but the goal isn't to be serious in understanding the text. The goal is to try and dismiss the text. The problem is, of course, when you say this is evil, then your next question has to be, well, what standard are you using? Yeah. Where's that, right? C.S. Lewis, I recognize, a line is crooked only if I measure it against a straight line. So what's your straight line?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and somebody said in one of the comments on the video, it said, slavery is immoral. It's always been immoral. The Bible promotes slavery, therefore the Bible is immoral. And so to that I asked, how do you know? By what belief system, by what basis are you claiming that slavery is immoral? And then he came back and says, well, I don't need that. He says it's quite simple. I use simple logic. If it's within my best interest to not be stolen from, therefore stealing is wrong. If it's within my best interest to not be murdered, therefore murder is wrong. If it's within my best interest to not be enslaved, that teaches me slavery is wrong. I kid you not, I turned to my 14-year-old daughter in our car after I read that comment, and I read it to her, and I said, what's wrong with this? And my 14-year-old daughter says, what if it's within your best interest to murder someone?
Right.
What if it's within your best interest to steal from someone or to enslave someone? It doesn't work. I said, yeah, that's actually what I commented back, and I said, there has to be a progenitor of truth outside of ourselves. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It's what it says in Judges that, they're without a king. Israel was without a king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Right.
And we see how that goes.
And yeah, so you get these ideas, these even utilitarianism has that problem ultimately when you start understanding when you talk about the greatest good for the greatest number. Well, that doesn't take into account those who don't count as the greatest number. I mean, wouldn't it be better to save the lives of 3 firefighters than to run and rescue one old lady in a burning house? But 3 firefighters will put their lives at risk to save one. So you've got...
Because life is valuable.
Because life is intrinsically valuable in and of itself, and the value is the aspect of life. Of course, in Nazi Germany, what they did was they simply redefined what it meant to be human, and the Jews didn't qualify.
Yeah.
So you have that aspect, that problem as well. And it's interesting that while they make these kinds of appeals, that the euthanasia laws continue to increase, where I guess life isn't all that valuable in and of itself. It's only valuable if you feel that you can enjoy it in a certain way.
Yeah, well, and if you're judging worth and morality from what's within, life really isn't that valuable. It's not that important. It's only as important as you make it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have someone outside yourself saying, no, you're more important than you would ever know, your life is more important than you would ever know, that the creator of the universe would lay down his life to save you and make you an eternal being. But that's lost on people, and it's sad. So
let's talk about this a little bit more. So we've talked a little bit about the mass shootings. We've talked about other forms of homicide that are going up. What are some other signs that we're seeing in our culture, that our culture is starting to rot from the inside because it has decoupled itself? Are there other signs that we have noticed that where culture has shifted, and maybe it's not cashed itself out into oblivion yet? The euthanasia would be one example where the dismissal of life, abortion is one example. But are there other things that maybe are a little bit more subtle that we need to start understanding? One of the things that I notice all the time is the rise of the anti-hero in movies and films, where, Dexter, as that series is a good example, where it doesn't matter if what he does is bad, as long as he's doing it to people who are worse than him. That kind of idea. So the rise of the anti-hero, and there was a slate of movies, especially in the last decade, where Maleficent and all, they were almost making excuses for the villains, kind of following our culture. What else have you seen out there that's a signal that we're losing the concepts and the very foundations that really builds the civilization that we remembered?
Yeah, we've gone from, I think the degradation of arts is kind of what you're getting at there. We've gone from art that imitates life to now life that imitates art, and our art is terrible. Like, it's just not good art, and so now life is terrible. We like you said, we celebrate the anti-hero, and we don't allow stories that are to be told that are true to the human condition and true to the populace of the human condition. So, like, you have a movie like Moonlight. You're familiar with the movie Moonlight that
I've
won
not seen it
the
yet.
Academy Award? It's basically about, it's like a coming of age story about a gay black man.
Okay.
Which is great. Make those movies, but we're being told that those movies are the most important form of art,
Right.
because of activism, right? It's when art becomes a form of activism as opposed to a picture of a picture of life and what makes life worth living, that becomes a dangerous thing. And so you have things like now there are certain anti-hero movies like something like Breaking Bad or that has something to say. It's more of a thought experiment
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a celebrating
Right.
and blurring the lines of what evil is. Everyone's aware, and it's clear through the entire run of Breaking Bad, Walter White is evil. What he is doing is evil. But then we start to find ourselves, why are we rooting for this guy who is evil? And there's a struggle that happens inside. That's good art, right? That's really good art. But when you have, oh gosh, what was the movie I was just thinking of? The bad guy is actually the good guy. Well, like you said, Maleficent.
Or
Well,
Deadpool,
Maleficent
or yeah.
or Deadpool or gosh, what was the movie? I was thinking of as a great example. Anyway, well, Maleficent is one of them. Mainstream movie about the villain. She was the villain. She was easily the villain in
It's her
Sleeping
name.
Beauty.
She's
Her
Maleficent.
name is
It's
Maleficent.
kind of clear.
Let's make a movie to show her lived experience
Yeah.
as to why maybe it's okay that she is the way that she is. You know, that's not a thought experiment. That's telling you what to think.
Right.
That's that's thinly veiled
That's propaganda.
activism.
Is the way it comes down.
Yeah. It's anything short of propaganda for sure. And so there's a lot of that going on in the arts.
And we
And
see
it's,
that
you
even
know,
with the new suggested parameters for Academy Award consideration for Best Picture, right? You
yeah,
have to have 30% representation of people of color. You have to have a leading character or a central secondary character before you'll even be considered for a nomination in this category. These are the suggested rules that they've announced recently. And again, it's like, well, why are you doing that? Why can't your ideas stand upon themselves? Do you have to, cloak them in these kinds of messaging systems?
well, and then like there used to be a sort of unwritten rule and understanding about like kids in movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're watching Jurassic Park from 1993,
Right. The first one.
there are kids specifically injected into that. Logically, when you step out of it and you go like, this doesn't make any sense that this guy would bring his grandkids to this dino infested island where somebody just died and now they're gonna do a tour to prove that it's safe. You want your grandkids to be a part of this? That's nuts. Logically, it doesn't make sense. But for the plot to make sense, kids are of high value in our society, and especially in 1993. And so by placing two kids into Jurassic Park, this extremely dangerous situation, you've just upped the ante. You've just upped what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, the
The
tension point.
stakes.
Yeah.
The tension and the stakes because people are like, oh my gosh, there's kids. Do you think anybody cared? In fact, most people enjoyed watching the lawyer getting eaten off the
Yeah.
toilet by the T-Rex. Do you think anyone would have ever enjoyed Tim or Lex getting eaten out of that car?
Right.
No. We were all rooting for those kids. And the driving force behind Dr. Alan Grant's character development was that he learned that kids are important. He's the guy that didn't want kids. He didn't like kids. He learned that kids are important. And so the whole movie, at the center of it, the stakes were really these two young kids. Now fast forward to a movie like The Quiet Place. What happened? Have you seen The Quiet Place?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to ruin it for you.
Yeah.
You should have seen it by now. The very beginning of The Quiet Place, in order to appear as stunning good art, within the first 5 minutes, there's a child sacrifice to the creatures. A child dies.
Right.
And people go, oh wow, that's crazy. That's so good that nothing's off limits. Now, is it reality that if there is a bunch of monsters that react to sound. I'm telling you right now, all my kids are going to die right away.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the way it is. But there used to be an understanding that society had a high value on children, and so there was almost like a unwritten rule, like, yeah, children don't die in movies unless it really, really means something.
Yeah.
Right. Even the movie, great movie, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, talking about a true event. We know millions of kids died in the Holocaust, but does it show? It shows the aftermath of when the kid died, but it didn't actually show on screen that the kid died, because there was a respect and a reverence for the future of humanity. Now you turn on a movie, it's just like, it's almost a novelty, from A Quiet Place to, you can name any number. We look at Stranger Things. Pretty much every season, there's like 3 or 4 teenagers or kids who die.
It's almost
And it
easy
becomes the
shock
premise.
value. It's almost like,
It's
yeah, using swear words when they're unnecessary or gratuitous nudity. It's an easy card for the writer to pull out, but they don't seem to appreciate why taboos are taboo. It's almost our society, and this is, I think, another trend that I'm seeing is I see that people think, oh, that's a taboo that should be broken. Why?
Yes.
Because it's a taboo. Well, maybe things are taboos for a reason, right? G.K. Chesterton says, if you see a wall that divides a land, you don't pull down the wall until you know why it's built, because it may be there for an important reason. But that's what our culture does. We have this arrogant assumption that because we live in a later decade than those who came before us, that we know more, and we simply don't know more. But
we're standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
The only reason we know what we know is because others have worked it out
over thousands of years of human history.
And it had humility to say, maybe I'm wrong. I need to submit to. That's kind of the idea of the logos, right? It's
right.
We don't have that. Even in Athens, they had tons and tons of gods, right? The pivotal moment in history and striking point for all of human philosophy, the reason we're able to do this right now, still had an idea that, well, we'll build a monument to the unknown God just in case, that all of our knowledge and value comes from something.
Right, exactly. And what it comes down to ultimately, when you think about it, is the commandment to love. So how do you define what true love is? We're talking about movie quotes, right? One of the things I think was interesting is, have you seen the recent Guardians of the Galaxy film?
I have not. I've given up on Marvel.
This one was actually not too bad, even though there was an iconoclast moment. It's the first time somebody dropped an F-bomb in a Marvel movie, which was not necessary, I think. But beyond that, though, it was fairly traditional in its understanding and its approach. It really focuses on the life of Rocket and how he was abused initially, and also, but seeks to rescue, puts the hero back in the hero driver's seat. So I thought it did a very good job in that. But what we're talking about really is understanding what love is. And in our society today, we are so self-driven that we don't even comprehend the idea of what it means to be selfless, which is really the way the biblical definition of love is, right? No man has a love for his friends in this, that a man lays down his life for his friends. So that's the ultimate form of love. Is no greater love than this, that a man lays down his life for his friends. Or there's a passage, I think, in Romans where Paul tells them, if a man steals, rebuke him, chastise him, help him not to steal, get him a job. And he says something fascinating after that. It's not so that he will just simply steal no more, but so that if he gets a job, he could turn around and give the money to the poor.
Yeah.
So the idea isn't simply stop doing that bad thing. It's what are you doing that's selfless for others? Then we know that you've become a Christian. Then we know that you're expressing the same type of love that our Savior expressed to us. That's huge. And that's a message that I don't even hear much in churches, that your love should be something, we have to stop talking about I and start talking about we. How does the community benefit from what I'm doing? The community, the church community especially, but the broader community in total. And how does my neighbor, who could be a Samaritan or whomever, benefit? So that's the piece that we definitely are missing today. That's what's not. And if you take that, are you going to shoot somebody? Of course not. That's why there were more guns per person, say 100 years ago in our society, but we had many fewer altercations than we do today in these kinds of ways, because people had a genuine respect and understood that individuals don't override the community needs in that regard.
Yeah, you can't simply regulate or legislate behavior. You have to change hearts so that behavior doesn't need to be legislated.
That's right.
That's what it is.
You can't just repress morality, because as you repress people's desires, they just want to come back more strongly. Absolutely. You've got to change them.
There's tons of laws on the books. I don't know if you've ever played that game Boulder Dash, but there's there's a few cards that name a bunch of crazy laws that are still in effect. One of them is, I think in Arkansas, you can't purchase a pickle unless you first bounce it on the ground.
Yeah.
No one's ever going to call the cops on somebody who doesn't bounce a pickle on the ground. Right. No one's ever going to think, I hope nobody arrests me if I don't bounce this pickle on the ground. They're just not going to bounce a pickle on the ground. They're just going to buy the pickle, because the law has no effect. The law is ludicrous. It does not matter. Same goes for things that are allowed by law. If everyone collectively agrees that it's wrong, even if the law allows it, they're not going to do it, right? It's not going to be a thing that is done. I saw an interview on Tim Pool with the Surfs. I don't know if you got to see some clips from it, but they were debating abortion. And Tim Pool asked the guy, he said, so you believe that the woman should have a right to kill their unborn child up to 9 months? And he says, of course, up to 9 months. Of course, that's right. And he says, okay, because if it's legal, it should be legal, and it's right. He says, okay, what about doing meth? He says, well, meth is illegal. And he said, well, but do you think it's okay for the woman to do meth while pregnant? Well, no, because that's harming the baby. And so he says, okay, let me get this straight then. You think it's okay because it's legal to abort a baby for that woman to kill a 9-month-old baby, but not okay morally for her to do meth because it's illegal. And he goes, yeah, because he's intentionally trying to kill the baby. The logic doesn't make any sense.
Right. There's a lot of problems in grounding what's ethical, what's morally right or wrong, with what's legal. And I tell people all the time, I said, well, yeah, adultery is legal. Does that make it right?
Yeah.
So, right. What are you gonna do? So, but again, this shows this hyper individualization in our society. This idea that we have to be captains of our own ship, right? We have to do whatever makes us personally fulfilled. That's coming in clash with those broader ideas of we do what's the betterment for others instead of ourselves. And the Texas migrant shooting, where the guy wanted to fire his gun in the air. It's just what he's done. It's how he celebrates. That's what he wanted to do. And he was very upset that people told him not to do it. Now, I think that there's some other issues going on there. He obviously had a capacity for rage, and there's some other issues. It was like the kids. There was a story out here where in the Inland Empire, some kids were in a car. They played Ding Dong Ditch 'Em on one of their friends. And the father got so enraged, he got into his car and started chasing them down the road. I mean, for miles, and ultimately rear-ended them and caused them to crash on Temescal Canyon Road here in like the Elsinore area. Killed 2 of them. And the father is going to jail now. And so his family's life is ruined. His life is ruined. The kids that he chased and killed, their lives are ruined. All because he felt affronted and wanted to teach those kids a lesson. And I see that attitude. This road rage is, something that we see over and over again these days on the highways as well. It's never deference to the other individual, and it's always I need to get mine first. And that's so again, these are I think symptoms of a broader societal problem where and I bring it up because people keep promoting the answer is let's remove the guns. I don't think removing the guns is going to solve the issue. I think it might delay it. I think people, maybe they'll choose less effective forms of violence, but I think there's going to be more and more people who are choosing violence full stop, and we're still going to have the problem.
Yeah, it's disingenuous to say that the Covington kids are dead because those guns were allowed to be purchased, and then to turn around and call the shooter a victim.
Right. Exactly.
It's intellectually dishonest. I mean, you cannot promote over and over and over again an immunity to criticism and ramification for action, and then be surprised when someone acts as if there's not going to be any ramifications for their actions.
Yeah.
It's completely ludicrous.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're just about the end of our time together, Ray. Thank you so much for being able to take some time to talk with me today. First of all, congratulations on your newly expanding family, right? Got a new baby, which is very cool. So we're happy to see that. And why don't you tell folks where they can follow you and get a hold of you if they want to hear more?
Yeah, it's just at Raymond Gregory everywhere. So just at Raymond Gregory and RaymondGregory.com.
Okay. And they can check out your website, check out your Instagram feed, which is pretty active right now. And then you have a YouTube channel, you're saying, is that you've been...
I do have a YouTube channel.
Been engaging and posting. Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you so much, brother. I love talking with you, and I'm sure we'll get back together in just a little while and have a chat again.
Cool.
All right. Talk to you later. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.